Hey, John.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, more or less on holiday, but really happy to be talking to you about things going on in Israel and beyond.
You just had to get that in to let us know that you're enjoying some sunshine right now, huh?
I did. I'm sorry. But, what can I say?
All right, fair enough, fair enough. So let's jump right in, and like you said, Israel and beyond. So let's start by doing that. Let's start kind of, a little bit more pinpointed, and then we'll expand outwards. The first thing I thought was really uplifting to see this past weekend was a joint protest between Palestinian and Jewish citizens of Israel, Arab Israelis, Jewish Israelis on the streets of Tel Aviv, coming together to protest about the rising crime rate in Arab towns, cities, and villages, and how basically Itamar Ben-Gvir, who we know as many things, but also as the Minister of National Security, has basically abandoned these communities. For me, seeing this kind of be a topic that there have been protests in Arab towns and villages for the past couple years, but this was the first time that we saw Jews and Arabs coming together to protest. I have a bunch of thoughts on this. I'm curious to hear, what did it make you think? What do you see as some sort of opportunity here, or is this the sign of something new and different happening? How much optimism do you have around this?
Well, I mean, you've pinpointed the key difference here. The fact that for the first time, really, Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis have gotten together in a very serious, large protest about an issue that has been talked about for years. For years, there has not been sufficient funds in the Arab communities to deal with a lot of things. Obviously, they get less money for education, they get less money for housing, for infrastructure. But the issue of crime, gangs, killings, daily killings, where innocent people sometimes are the victims, people afraid to leave their homes. This has been relatively new. I mean, relatively new, as you suggest, in the last 2 years, where things have gotten out of control. And they've gotten out of control in large part, as you mentioned, because the Minister of Public Security is happy to see these gangs operating and for the Arab villages to be in the kind of disruption that they are. Rather than sending the police there to assist, to help ensure that the rule of law and public safety is maintained, he's essentially done nothing. And that's why the people were protesting. They need help, serious help, and they've recognized that they're not getting it from the state. That one of the things a state is called upon to do is to maintain public security. It's one of its most important goals, and that's not happening there. And it was, as you noted, particularly important that Jewish Israelis got together with Arab Israelis. We've seen standing together where Jews and Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis get together for a variety of reasons. But this wasn't just standing together. I'm sure they were there, but these were other Jewish Israelis who wanted to support their fellow citizens on a really important issue.
Yeah, I agree. It was also really interesting to see that it was kind of as you're hinting at, like it was Arab-led, Palestinian-led, and Jewish Israelis, and that's kind of been one of the critiques of the protest is that it's kind of been largely Jewish, Zionist, and it's like, hey, Arabs, if you want to come along, but we're not really necessarily going out of our way to make space for you. Not that you're not welcome, but we're not going out of our way to make space for you. This was actually Jewish Israelis saying, it's your communities, it's your towns and villages. You tell us what you need from us, and we're going to show up in solidarity. And we saw it from politicians as well. There's a really heartwarming video of a member of Knesset, Gilad Kariv, meeting with some Arab youth and having a conversation. You know, just kind of talking about as politicians should be doing, not just politicians from the left, but politicians should be doing. Tell us what's happening in your community. Tell us your concerns. Um, and I kind of wanted to also mention in that I see this, and I'm curious your thoughts here, but I see this as a really interesting opportunity for the Israeli left to reclaim, the Israeli political left, to reclaim the mantle of the party of safety and security, because that has been kind of the hardest thing and what has caused the left to kind of disintegrate in Israel is the fact that, after the second intifada and then after, the disengagement and all these different things, that the right has really been able to paint themselves as the party of security, and the left are these like, pie in the sky, peace loving hippies. They don't understand, they don't understand our realities. Now, all of a sudden, we see the worst security failure in Israel's history happen under a right wing government. And we see an issue that's getting more and more attention. We see that it's the left showing up to say, how can we help safety and security in your community? Do you think there's an opportunity here?
Well, it's interesting that the Democracy Party, led, of course, by Yair Golan, was the only party that participated in those protests. And of course, Yair Golan,
The only Jewish party, because the
the only
joint list
Jewish,
participated.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, the only Jewish party. The joint list, of course, was there. And let's mention how important it is that the joint list is a joint list this
Yes.
year. That will be so important in the upcoming election. But the fact that Democracy Party, led by Yair Golan, was also there is significant. It's significant, as you say, because it's there pushing for security within the country. But it's also significant because they are still the only party that has said publicly that they want to work with the joint list, with Arab parties, who represent, of course, 20% of the vote. And most analysts would suggest that if the opposition to Bibi is going to win, they're going to need the seats. Now, the largest number of seats that the joint list has ever got is 15. They got 4 or 5 in the last election. If they can get a significant number, and if the Democracy Party can get a significant number, and they're now polling somewhere between 9 and 15, I think 12, if they can boost that, then between them, they are going to be a significant bloc in the anti-Bibi group. And I think it's extremely important. I of course, would like Yair Lapid and Bennett and Eisenkot and Lieberman. Lieberman will never do it, but the others should be standing with the joint list, the Arab Israelis. And perhaps we know they will afterwards because they're going to need them, but they should be doing it now. So this protest and who's participating in it is important for a variety of reasons, as you suggest.
Yeah, and I think worth mentioning as well, it's one of those things that I think a lot of folks in the diaspora are having a hard time wrapping their heads around. Obviously, the Jewish establishment isn't too keen to promote protests, especially when they're joint Arab and Jewish. But we also know that from the extreme left, seeing Zionists march with Palestinians is also not something that they really want to get behind. So this is something that, well in the numbers, they turned out, at least this past Saturday, they turned out similar numbers to what of some of the largest pro-democracy protests, it seemed to me at least to be a lot quieter in terms of the rhetoric. So I think that this is a place where the diaspora Jews that really care about this, I think that we should really also be showing our support and talking about this and promoting this, because this could really influence, as you said, it could influence a lot beyond just who's in the streets and how many.
Yeah, yeah. And let me just put in a plug for Standing Together and other groups
Yes.
Who join together in Israel and who demonstrate the importance of coexistence within Israel. And one hopes that this will be, a growing movement.
Agreed. Agreed. Yes. So let's switch to another topic now. I think this past week or last week, saw headlines that after over 2 years, the death toll that the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry had been long reporting, which is approximately 70,000 Palestinians dead in the past 2+ years of fighting, which we have seen both the Israeli government and Hezbollahists across the diaspora and across the world vehemently deny. The IDF has now accepted those numbers, which I'll also mention has always happened in past conflicts. The IDF always ultimately accepts the numbers that are being collected by the Gaza Health Ministry. What does this say to you? How are you feeling about, 2 years later after this, campaign to delegitimize these numbers and delegitimize, the sanctity of life in Gaza? A ceasefire comes into effect, people's attention is turned elsewhere, and all of a sudden they quietly go, yeah, no, these are the right numbers.
Well, I have a number of thoughts on it. One, as you suggested, I have spoken at a variety of venues where when I mentioned that number, people would stand up and say, those are the Gaza numbers. We don't believe them. How do you know? The second thing I would say is the 71,000 number is those that have been identified. They've all been identified as dead, and that's why the IDF and the Israeli government is accepting them. But there are thousands of people still under the rubble. We don't know how many. It could be 10,000, it could be more. So that number can go up. Secondly, they seem to have suggested that 2/3 are innocent civilians, and that 1/3 were Hamasniks, were combatants. They also seem to have accepted that 20,000 of those innocent people, the 2/3, were children. So we're now dealing with a very significant number of civilian deaths in a relatively short period of time. If you compare the number of civilian deaths that happened in Afghanistan, in Iraq, certainly in Ukraine, where the vast majority of deaths, there's a lot of deaths, over 2 million, but almost all of them are soldiers, they're combatants, and relatively few civilians. This is a very high number of deaths in a relatively short period of time. The other thing that I would say is that this number appeared in Haaretz. It obviously appeared in the Washington Post and in the New York Times, but it appeared in Haaretz in a story. It hardly made anything else in Israel. Yediot Ahronot carried it, basically mentioned it. Ynet mentioned it. No other newspapers have agreed to, after criticizing the numbers all along, have even published it. So there are many Israelis who don't even know that Israel has agreed to this number. And unfortunately, probably many Israelis, given what they've been through, don't care. And don't care about how many. I don't know if the word is don't care, but don't have in their hearts the ability to care about what the number of children and other innocents that have been killed. So this is all part of what is going to happen when independent journalists are finally allowed in. The Supreme Court last week once again agreed to a 2 month delay based on security concerns by the IDF. There are hundreds of NGOs operating there. There's a ceasefire in place. And there's no reason, to my mind, why independent journalists can come in, but they aren't. But when they come in and when they do their digging and when they report, then Israelis are going to begin to understand what happened in Gaza, perhaps better than now. And some Israelis may pay a price for that. We'll see. But the numbers are indeed, they've been shocking all along. And the fact that they've been finally agreed to, I think, is a good thing. And I would hope that those in the diaspora who disagreed with those figures will also agree that after 11 weeks of a siege and little food coming in even before that, or insufficient food coming in before that, that people were starving or were almost starving in Gaza, and that these also were not fake reports. That was a reality. So the truth comes out. It comes out after often, whether it was the Vietnam War or what happened in Afghanistan. But I'm glad it's finally coming out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I was thinking the other day about the conference that we did 2 years ago, and you moderated a conversation with Rebecca Metzer, who at the time worked for Gisha, which is an organization that deals with legal aid and legal issues for Gazans, their right of movement and legal rights in Gaza. Really interesting organization. I remember Rebecca just being an incredible speaker, and I remember her. I'm going to try to pull up the clip and maybe send it out or send out the YouTube link with when we share this as well, because I remember her sitting there, and it was maybe 6 months or not even 6 months after October 7th, and just calmly explaining why these numbers are going to be not only accurate, but actually will probably be much higher for the same reasons that you note. Bodies having been identified versus those still under the rubble, etc. And I think that it was really hard, to your point, it was really hard at the time for folks to accept it and hear it. And I think she was maybe one of the more controversial speakers in the room. And I think you're kind of alluding to this too, trying to stick our heads in the sand and ignore it when it's been, like we saw with Rebecca. This has not been a secret. We have known this, just so many have tried to avoid it. And I just want to give just a special moment to reiterate something that you said. So, and let me clarify this, what you said. Israel has accepted that amongst that 71,000, 20,000 were children. Israel has accepted that?
I don't know if they've accepted that. The Gaza Health Ministry has said that 20 of those civilians dead, Israel says 1/3, 2/3. I don't know what Gaza Health Ministry is saying about the 71,000, but of the civilian deaths, 20,000 are children. Whether Israel is admitting that or not, I don't know. But if they're admitting that the numbers of the Gaza Health Ministry are right, I would hope they're not now trying to say that, no, it was only 10,000 children or 15,000 children. Those are the numbers of generally accepted numbers.
Right. And I mean, the depravity of saying only 10, going only, what is that only number that we would be okay with? I would only be okay with 0, quite frankly.
Well, and going back to what you were saying about Rebecca, at the time, the Gaza Health Ministry was reporting 10,000 deaths. And at the time, I, my wife, others were absolutely shocked by the fact that there were 10,000 deaths already because you'd only had 2 or 3 months of war. Yeah. The other thing I'll just say is that Gisha, whom you've mentioned, is strongly supported by the New Israel Fund of Canada, one of our partners. And
Yes.
it's a great organization, and it's one of the few, as you mentioned, that's fighting for the legal rights of Gazans, whether it's to get into Israel for hospital treatment, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and we'll link to, you're right, Gisha is such an interesting organization and often flies under the radar. So we're going to link to them as well. I know Rebecca is no longer working there, but the organization is definitely still around and doing work that is more important now than ever. So we'll link to them because it's worth people knowing a little bit more about who they are. Okay, yep.
We're going to start talking about Rafah. I think, and I imagine that one of the things Gisha is doing is trying to expand the number of Palestinians that are being allowed in and out of Rafah, and we can talk about that when you're ready.
Let's talk about that right now. Very good segue. So this is going to be, I think, maybe our meatiest topic. So let's devote a little bit more time to this because we've seen a few things happen over the past couple of weeks. The biggest one, and we'll link as well to our statement about it. We saw the final hostage remains, the remains of Ran Gvili, Zichrono Levarcha, who was a police officer who's thought to have been murdered on October 7th by Hamas. His was the last body still being held in Gaza. In a lot of ways, that was being used as an excuse as to why we couldn't move to phase 2 of a ceasefire. His body has now been returned to Israel. We've talked about this push coming from the Trump administration to move to phase 2. Like you mentioned, the Rafah border is now open. And let's just add to that, to make it even more complex, let's just add to that we still see the Trump administration throwing around some threats in the direction of Iran. So we've got a Middle East that is somehow in a ceasefire and also perhaps in a lot of ways more volatile and insecure than ever. So what happens next? What are we going to see next?
Well, concentrating first on Rafah. As you said, Prime Minister Netanyahu made the return of Gvili a precondition. It really wasn't a precondition, but he made it a precondition, and that's fine. Body was returned, thankfully, and he finally agreed to open the Rafah crossing. Rather than opening it to both people movement and goods movement, i.e. humanitarian assistance, he's opened it only to people movement. That's people going out, many of them for medical aid abroad. There are 20,000 Gazans, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, who require either cancer treatment or operations, some medical treatment that they can't get within Gaza, given, of course, the situation of medical care in Gaza. Many of the hospitals down, much of the medicine not needed, much of the cancer care not available, et cetera, et cetera. So getting people out is, according to Israel, much easier. Israel has a less problem with people leaving, obviously. 100,000 people have apparently left Gaza during the war, in addition to those that will begin leaving now. And there are people now returning. Those people returning are security checked by the Egyptians. Let's recall, Rafah is the border between Egypt and Gaza. Both Egypt and Israel had taken control of the Gazan side. Egypt had control of the Egyptian side. So they were keeping the border closed and allegedly secure, preventing smuggling, etc. Now that it's open, we've got people coming back, not in the numbers that we would have hoped, very small numbers, 50 people, but people coming back, and they are security checked by the Egyptians and Europeans who are at the Egyptian side, and then by Israelis coming in. So it's a good thing. It's not perfect. The humanitarian organizations had hoped that This would be used for humanitarian assistance. Not yet. Maybe it will come. Witkoff and the Trump administration do seem intent on moving the second phase forward. And that is a positive thing. As long as they're in the picture and as long as they're putting pressure on Netanyahu and they're getting Turkey and Egypt and Qatar to put pressure on Hamas, then this is a good thing. I think in Gaza, the most important thing to happen is getting the technocratic committee in there and beginning to work. And basically, Hamas has said once that technocratic committee is in place and operating, that they're prepared to begin disarming. That's what has to happen next in Gaza, as far as I'm concerned.
Now, Iran.
Yeah, if you want to talk about Iran, really another situation that you never would have predicted from the Trump administration. The Trump administration came in with a MAGA base that wanted no more foreign wars, wanted Trump to make America great again and concentrate on America, and frankly, forget about the rest of the world. Well, in some ways, he's forgot about the rest of the world because he's cut off U.S. aid and he's, essentially ignoring Africa, much of Latin America, except Cuba and Venezuela and Colombia. And now, however, after his foray in Venezuela and his failed attempt to grab Greenland, he has moved a significant, it's not perhaps what he would need for a full offensive against Iran, but he has moved an armada of ships and planes and a readiness to attack in Iran. And he's claiming that he's either going to get a negotiation and agreement, essentially, allegedly on nuclear, on ballistic missiles, and on proxies, on stopping to aid proxies, in exchange for not attacking. I would say in the region, Israel is not keen on an American attack unless it was a very significant attack. I mean, taking out Revolutionary Guard headquarters, taking out the headquarters of the Bajis, hitting the police, and maybe, getting Khomeini. But they're worried that if it's not super major, that Iran will do what it said it would do, which is attack America's allies in the region. And that would mean more ballistic missiles heading towards Israel. Iran does not have much of a defense left after what Israel did in the last war, and it doesn't have much of an air force, but it definitely has rockets. And so they would attack Israel, they would attack US bases, they might attack oil facilities. One doesn't know, but it would really begin to destabilize the region. And frankly, Iran did a fair bit of damage in Israel the last time. 1,000 rockets, a few people were killed, a number were injured, but the damage to places like the hospital in the south and various other major facilities in Israel, whose names escape me right now. But there was serious damage done, and rebuilding is now taking place. So Israel doesn't particularly want this. The Saudis don't particularly want it. They were in the U.S. Their national security advisor was in the U.S. the last couple of days, apparently telling the U.S. that they don't want it, telling right-wing think tanks that they did want it. So who knows? But it's dangerous. Reporting this morning that the U.S. hit an Iranian drone that seemed to be approaching an American ship. So that's the first kinetic action in the region, and one really doesn't know what's going to happen. Let me just say that there was an important report. The president of Slovakia, Slovakia is one of the two countries in the EU that has strongly supported the Trump administration, the other being Viktor Orban's Hungary. There's a report out that the president of Slovakia met with Trump, and when he went back to speak to his EU colleagues in Brussels and report on it, he reportedly told them that he was frightened by what he heard from Trump and frightened about Trump's state of mind. He was seriously concerned about the way he was speaking and what he was saying. Now, the president, I think, has since denied this, but 4 or 5 European diplomats are saying this is exactly what happened. And you really begin to wonder about the mental state of the man who could begin a war, a regional conflict. And that's, it's scary enough when you've got a president who's making a decision whom you feel is taking all the information in, weighing it, and on that basis is deciding what to do. Here, Iran is not currently a threat. Iran has been sitting back. It's been a threat to its people, a serious threat to its people. It's not a threat to the region right now. Is Trump doing this to protect Iranian civilians? Is he doing this once again for the nuclear and the ballistic missiles? We don't know. But as I say, we are in danger of conflict, and nobody knows how that conflict will end. Just worth mentioning, final point, efforts to take out regimes in Yemen, in Iraq, have not worked out terribly well. In Afghanistan, none of them have worked out terribly well. You don't know what you're going to be left with. And there doesn't seem to be a united Iranian opposition either within Iran or outside Iran. And that itself is problematic. So wait and see with bated breath.
Right. I wanted to actually, the 2 questions that I wanted to ask you following up on that are kind of do touch on 2 things that you mentioned. So let's start with what you just mentioned in terms of taking out regimes. So that was something that was interesting to me when you said, the Israelis would have no interest in a U.S. attack unless it was something very major. But, so even if it is something major, and even if it's quote unquote successful, what would happen next? Like you said, there is no unity in any sort of opposition or opposing force. So could you even try to predict or say, let's say there is such a major attack, what happens? What does the day after look like?
It's really hard to say. Of course, the son of the Shah, who's in California, and hasn't really been an actor in this until very recently, is saying that he would like to come back as a transitional figure and try and unite the country behind him. There are many people in Iran and outside Iran that don't support that, but he is the only figure that has stood up so far suggesting that he could play that role. But of course, it depends on how successful an attack is. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard is extremely powerful. It's not just an army. It controls much of the Iranian economy. They will fight to the death. The Bajis will fight to the death. I don't know. I'm not expert enough to know whether an attack from the air, from ships, without actually getting boots on the ground would be enough to eliminate these groups. So I'm really, not able to predict what would happen. But the hope would be that the bad guys would lose and the good guys would somehow come out, supported from the diaspora, as we've seen in other places. Sometimes Latvia, for example, Lithuania, where the diaspora came in and supported governments. But who knows?
Right. And in fairness, I think that anyone who could say that they could confidently predict what is going to happen next or what would happen on the day after is probably just blowing a lot of smoke. So it's not not just a matter of expertise. I think it would be hard for anyone to accurately predict that. But I wanted to ask you a final question, which has to do exactly with your area of expertise. I'm really curious to hear from you as a former diplomat. We're talking about the Saudis, we're talking about Turkey and Egypt and Qatar and the pressure that they're kind of trying to put simultaneously on the US administration and on Tehran to negotiate. Very unclear what a negotiation would look like at this point. And given that we're talking about actors who are, let's say dubious, what diplomacy look like? How do you make those decisions in diplomacy of like who to engage with and when, and what risks are taken when you're dealing with, hostile actors, but who you need at the table to advance, like is having someone at the table to advance one thing dangerous for what that may mean to their power for another thing going forward? And how is that managed, specifically with amongst diplomats and negotiators?
Well, let me say that after having what I've just said about Donald Trump, um, he broke all the rules
Mm-hmm.
in bringing together the parties for the ceasefire. Um, Nobody was ever supposed to deal with Hamas directly. He dealt with Hamas directly initially and got a hostage released. Then he brought Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt together. They aren't necessarily the best of friends. Qatar was
Mm-hmm.
not a great friend of Turkey, but they were all interested in the same thing, i.e., getting a ceasefire in Palestine. So they did come together. They had one thing in common, that Hamas leaders uh, were both in Qatar and sometimes in Turkey. Obviously, Egypt had a good reason for wanting the ceasefire, having this war on its border. So he brought these groups together. And then he did, frankly, what no other US president has been able to do as forcefully. George Bush 41 put pressure on the Israeli prime ministers. Carter put some pressure on. Others have, but nobody has put the kind of pressure on Bibi that Trump did. And so he broke some rules in that regard by really putting the pressure on. I don't know what he said, but it may have to do with the upcoming election. It may have to do with the $4 billion that Israel gets every year. It may have to do with other things that we don't know about. But he was able to get that ceasefire. So in many ways, he's kind of broken the rules and gotten that. Joe Biden was operating and was moving towards some of these things, but couldn't quite do it. He never could have talked to Hamas. He would have been demonized by the Republican Party, demonized by even conservative Jews who normally vote for the Democrats. He couldn't have done that. He couldn't have worked with the Qataris, even though, of course, we now know that Bibi was working with the Qataris and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to flow to them. But to your question, you don't make peace with your friends. You make peace with your enemies. So it's inevitable that diplomats who are mediating um, inevitably will bring enemies together, and they will bring the friends of enemies to put pressure on that enemy on both sides, because they're enemies to each other, to try and make peace. And you saw this in Northern Ireland, and the other thing I would say is that we're in a bit of a new age. And you asked me as a diplomat, we're in an age where the Witkoffs of the world are talking to their counterparts in countries. Leaders are talking directly to leaders. The US ambassador in Israel is not making these deals. He will carry them out. He will advocate for them. He will push. He will be in touch with Kushner and Witkoff. But when Witkoff and Kushner want to come to Israel, they don't wait for a signal from the ambassador. He just prepares the way. So the role of ambassadors is, I would say, is somewhat less these days, when it's very easy for foreign ministers and secretary of states just to pick up the phone and talk to each other. They're meeting constantly in the G7, in the G20, in G7 foreign minister meetings, etc. So there's lots of room for hard work, but it's often being done at quite a high level of personal representatives of leaders, etc.
Interesting. New world in many ways is what I'm hearing. maybe some not quite for the best, but trying to keep some hope alive. Is there anything else we should talk about today, Jon, or could I let you go have a margarita and some tacos?
I think we've talked about a lot, and I'm sure we'll be able to talk about a lot more. I'll give people a plug for a very interesting conversation
Please.
on Israel Dialogues this Friday at 12 o'clock. Aaron David Miller, who is one of the premier analysts of Israel-US relations, and Asher Susser, who is a former head of one of the largest and best think tanks in Israel and emeritus professor at Tel Aviv U, will be talking about US-Israel relations. So that's at Holy Blossom, and it's called Israel Dialogues. It starts at 12 on Friday. And if you want to hear two very intelligent people talking about what's happening, then tune in if you can.
We will link to that as well in the email, so that's great to hear. I think you meant to say two other very intelligent people because they've already listened to us. But yes, you're absolutely right. And I actually didn't know about that, but that sounds like a fantastic conversation. So thanks for putting it on my radar as well. Okay, Jon, I'm going to let you get back to your vacation for the last, the remaining few weeks that you've got in the sunshine. But thanks so much, as always, for your time. And we'll talk again in a few weeks.
I'm looking forward to it. Take care, mate.
You too.